growing up in the church, there was this sermon I used to hear all the time that used to confuse me to no end, and it was this: Jesus wants to be your number one priority. God should be your number one priority. And typically the message would insinuate that every good American would have God as their number one, family as their number two, your country as number three, and number four would be your job, and maybe five, your hobbies, friends, however you want to lay the mix out. And they would preach a passage from Luke many times in conjunction with this message, and the passage would be from Luke chapter 14, verse 26, and it says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." And then they would say, God wants to be your number one priority. And they would say that this passage, Jesus didn't really want you to hate anyone, that was hyperbolic, and that Jesus was just trying to make a point using hyperbole. The trouble is, I don't really think God wants to be your number one priority. The problem with this kind of thinking is that we would literally separate our lives distinctly and put God at the top and then others. And maybe if you use math, it makes a little bit more sense. What percentage are you going to give God? Are you going to give him 25%, or maybe even 50% goes to God and 25% goes to family, and then you mathematically lay out the rest of those percentages, and it starts to make sense as to why this really isn't what Jesus is saying. Jesus doesn't want to be separated from the rest of your life on the top. And in fact, the Bible teaches a different principle, and I believe this passage, exactly what Jesus is really trying to say, and really saying quite well, as he says all things well, is that God wants to be your only priority. And that in understanding that God wants to be your only priority, that every other element of your life would flow from that. So in other words, if you pursue God 100%, the reality would be that your family, your relationships with your job and your country and all of those things would find their proper place if we were to pursue God 100%. And so that's really what he's saying, is God only and nothing else. So in other words, why I love my family, why I go to my job, is because of God, and he infiltrates and becomes the reason I do everything, so that I can do everything to the glory of God. And if I can't do something to the glory of God, well, it's probably something I should not be doing. I find this principle to be true, that it's also simple, and that if you and I give God 100% and we love God 100%, how every other area of our life falls into the right place. And it's very in line with Jesus saying that to love God and to love others fulfills the rest of the commandments, but it sets us on a path of following God in a way that's so much simpler and more obtainable than trying to perfect every area of your life on its own. Because obviously God does want us to love other people, but when we love people through him and by him, it makes more sense. A good analogy to understand this would be a man who loves to play golf. Maybe he loves golf, but he spends most of his time at his job. Now, if we were to look at time and go, well, if he works all day, we might say that he actually loves to work by how he spends his time, but it's not really true. The reason he works is because he loves to play golf, and it gives him the money and the ability to go play golf. So this is how it is with God, that we might spend a lot of time doing other things because it's not reasonable that we could give 100% of our time and energy and effort and all things that we do to religious activities, because it's not possible in the world we live in. And God's not demanding that of you and me, but is God the most powerful force in your life? Is he the reason you do what you do? Do you get out of bed in the morning for the glory of God? Or do you get out of the bed for any other reason? Let me tell you, there's hopelessness found in any other reason, but pure joy in your life can be motivated by following God in every step that you do. So don't separate and divide your life out, but let God and Jesus infiltrate all that you do, and you'll be following after the teachings that Christ has called us to and asking us to be his disciples and us getting to be his disciples.